Olam, I'll get it right in a moment. Amotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed are you, O Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has brought forth bread from the earth. You know, when the Jews did Passover every year, that statement was made probably 24 times during the Passover feast. Every time they would do anything pertaining to bread, that statement was made. Every time they spoke about the harvest that God brought forth for the people, that statement was made, and it's a powerful statement. I enjoy the Hebrew language. I learn little smatterings now and again. One of the phrases that you'll hear in the Hebrew language is lachaim, and it's a term that you see it in movies. You'll see it in social settings where people will say to one another lachaim, which means it's a toast. And in a Jewish household, if you were about to drink Mountain Dew or Jewish wine or whatever, you pick it up and it's lachaim. But there's more to it than that. Now all they say in the movies is lachaim, but in the Jewish household, in the synagogue, if they're saying that to one another, the term is lachaim atumea esrim, which means to life for 120 years.
Thank you, Jesus.
They've been saying since the ancient days of the rabbis, long before Jesus, they have been saying what the Bible says in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3. My spirit shall not always strive with man, but the length of a man's days shall be 120 years. Amen. They've been saying that all along. And today, interestingly enough, if you look at all the different ethnic groups on the planet, the Jewish people have a longer lifespan than any other individual ethnic group on the planet. Now think about that in a nation where there are people going around with bombs blowing folks up every time you turn around. Yet they have the longest average lifespan of any people on the planet. Why? They've been saying it for 4,000 years to life for 120 years. So they're pushing for it, and I've been pushing for it for years. How many years, Sharon, have I been saying that to people? It's been a while. That I'm not going with 70 or 80, I'm going to 120. And on my 120th birthday, I plan on getting up and having a good breakfast, playing golf with my sons, and coming home that evening and having a party. Then after the party, I'll decide that night if I'm going home. Because I also have Psalm 91 where the Lord said, with long life will I satisfy her. God didn't say I'm going to give you life as long as I want you to have it. He said, I will satisfy you with long life. When you're satisfied, you can go home. That's the contract. Yeah. You know, if you have somebody doing contract work on your house, when can they go home? I'm talking about and stay. When the job's done. Because when the contract is finished is when they're supposed to get paid, right? Mm-hmm. Well, some people go home early and expect to get a full paycheck. That doesn't work either. All right, let's move forward here. We're talking about becoming a person of influence. And so let's get to this. Leadership is influence. Simply stated, it can't be anything more. Leadership is influence. Our goals that we're working on is to increase influence, and that is influence equals leadership. You want to increase your influence, you increase your ability to lead. You want to increase your ability to lead, you grow your influence. That's just the rule of life. Our goals in training is to better understand influence and to increase our influence in the lives of others around us. We did the influence inventory, and who do you influence? How do you influence others? And we looked at force. That's the worst way in the world to influence, but some people do it that way. They're bullies. Intimidation. They can be called a bully, but a bully actually he'll put his hands on you. Intimidation does a lot of threat. That's out there. Manipulation. That's a con job. That's deception. To manipulate somebody, you have to deceive them. Positional leadership, you influence people because you have a title. You have a name. I shared with you the 5 levels of leadership is position, permission, production, personal development, and pinnacle leadership. Position leadership, you are the leader because you have a title. First time I came into this building, who was the pastor? So he's the leader. I didn't know him, but he was the pastor, he's the leader. That's position leadership. Every leader lives at that realm with people that he's newly meeting. Second is permission. He's the pastor because you like him. Well, it didn't take me long to like Pastor Dennis back there. He's a likable kind of a fellow, so he became, in my estimation, a permission leader real quick. You understand? That we have at position, you're the leader because you have a right. At permission, you're the leader because you have a relationship. The next level is production leadership. You're the leader because you produce. That's respect. Or actually, that's well, you have the leadership because you produce. You get the job done. The next level is the leadership called personal production or personal development. You are the leader because you develop other people around you. And then the pinnacle leadership is the highest, and that simply means you're the leader because of who you are. You've been at this business, you've done this for so long, you've proven who you are, and you are at pinnacle leadership with somebody. But the interesting thing about these 5 levels is, even if you have grown to pinnacle level leadership with a group of people who know you well, those who just meet you, you're still a positional leader. Because while we grow into the different levels, we never leave any of them. We're always there, okay? So we talked about those levels. Position, again, you're out front because you have a title. Exchange influence is where you are the influencer because you have developed, you've gone beyond a relationship. Now you're sharing ideas. You're a person who's not afraid to share an idea, nor are you afraid to listen to an idea. And because you're willing to share and listen, you're able to bring things together. Next is persuasion. We use the term there for Twitter followers. You know, follow me. And I ask people a lot of times when if they're on Twitter, and they say yes, and I say, well, are you writing anything on there worth following? Or are you just spouting out the menu of the day? Or are you really saying something worth following? Because that's what they're called. They're called followers. And then, we're back to exchange. Then respect leadership. I put my picture there because I'm a respected individual, actually. Because I'm trying to get some people to lighten up a little bit, to have some fun. Respect leadership is, you're the leader because of who you are. You've proven yourself, and people realize you're not there to hurt them, you're there to help them, build them up, and we move on. Then we talked about how many people do you influence. A mother influences that one life. I heard or read a story a couple of days ago that really stuck with me. A Scottish farmer, Sharon, you heard this today. Scottish farmer by the name of Fleming. This is the 19th century. Was working his farm one day, and he heard a little boy screaming for help. True story. He went and found the small boy, about 9 years of age, trapped in the bog. Now, if you've ever been to Ireland or Scotland, you would know what I'm talking about. They have what they call a bog. And have you ever heard the term peat bog or bog peat? It's peat that comes out of the bog. They dry that stuff over there, and they can burn it for fuel. It's amazing. It's decayed plant product. And they have places in Ireland and in Scotland where the bog is out there, and you can walk on the ground and literally feel the ground give unto you. It's like walking on a cushion. But when you pull the ground back for about 6 inches down, you reach the bog. And that bog can go down quite deep. Well, this boy was trapped in it. The farmer, Fleming, pulled him from the bog and cleaned him up and sent him on home. A couple of weeks later, a carriage pulls up in front of Farmer Fleming's home, and a lord of England, he was in the British aristocracy, part of the parliament, he stepped out of the buggy and came to the door and asked if you are Farmer Fleming. Yes, I am. And he said, you saved my son, and I want to reward you for saving my son's life. I want to give you something. Farmer Fleming talked with him, and he said, I don't need a reward. I did the Christian thing. That's all it was needful for me to do. That's all it was needful for me to have. About that time, Farmer Fleming's little boy came out of the door. And the gentleman that had just gotten out of the carriage said, "Is that your son?" And Farmer Fleming said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Well, allow me to do this for you. Allow me to be responsible for his education." And so Farmer Fleming looked at his little boy and looked at the man, and he said, "I will make something of him of which you will be proud. I promise." So Farmer Fleming said, "Okay, for my son, I'll do it." And so he took the education of the lad upon himself. And years later, Farmer Fleming's son, named, I believe it was Arthur Fleming, became a medical doctor, a scientist, and he was the man who discovered penicillin. So the Lord had done what he said. He made somebody of his son that the farmer could be proud. But that's not the end of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. In a few years, the Lord's son became quite ill, was in fact dying with pneumonia. Well, penicillin was a new drug, not widely known on the market, but the Lord got hold of Dr. Fleming now, the young man, and said, "My son needs help." And Dr. Fleming came to the young man's aid and gave him injections of penicillin, healed the pneumonia, cleared it up, and Sir Winston Churchill became one of the greatest men of statesman quality. You never know whose life you're touching and whose life you're changing. Just think where we would be today if Winston Churchill had not been the man who ascended to authority in about 1940, 41 for Great Britain. Think of it. All right, so you might be influencing only one, but you don't know who that one is going to be. 40 years ago in Zambia, somebody was teaching Edgar Lungu. All he was to them was a child. He's just a student in my class. But today, Edgar Lungu is the president of Zambia. Wonder if they had a clue. I wonder if the teacher of Donald Trump had a clue when he was in the second grade. You got to wonder. And I think most people rarely give any consideration to the possibilities of that, but that's what's possible in leading them. We looked at this. I'm not going to continue with that. Lady Gaga has something like 95 million Twitter followers. God help us. If that's the influence in our world today, we're in deep trouble. She and Justin Bieber. When we talk about influence, when do you influence others? And then the statement you see there, leaders are readers. I mean, we're not talking about reading books, although leaders do read books. We're talking about readers read situations. They look at a situation, they read what is there. And leaders sense teachable moments. Leaders sense breakthrough places in people's lives. Leaders sense catalyst times. This person's at a time where if I do the right thing now, I can spark them for the next many years to move forward. And why do we influence others? Trust can be one of the issues. Where do you influence? In fact, it should be the key issue. Where do you influence others? It can be the boardroom. It could be the classroom. It could be any place. Sunday school room. And we talk about influence or insights into influence. Leadership is influence. That is a definition that'll stay with you always. Our influence with our influence with others is usually not in all areas. I hope I never influence Pastor McCowan in electrical work. I will get him hurt. You understand electrical work, I don't. Your influence, and you need to realize this, your influence should be developed and strengthened in the areas where you are developed and strong. Okay, so when we talk about that, we look at the responsibility. With influence comes responsibility. And I think you have it in your in your paper there, on one of your pages, on page 12, at the bottom you will see a triangle. And as you go up, you see the arrows going across that list options. But the higher you go in leadership, the fewer options you have. It's like studying for a degree. When you're in the first grade, how many options do you have? Your whole life's before you, right? But now you are getting near the end of high school, you've applied to a college, you've been accepted. Let's say you've been accepted to Duke. High class school, big name, big budget. But you've been accepted to Duke and given a scholarship, full ride. My question to you is, how many options do you have at Duke as opposed to the number of options you had in the 5th grade? And the answer is a lot less. You may not have known them in the 5th grade, but your whole life was before you. Choices were everywhere. You're at Duke. There are a limited number of degree programs in which Duke specializes. So you are limiting your options the higher you go in education. You get when you declare your major, and let's say your major is mass communications. Okay? I'm sure Duke has a good program in mass communications. That's your major. Now, because your major is mass communications, how much sociology are you going to study? Some, but not as much as if you were a sociology major. When you pick your major, your options diminish. Now, you're finished with your mass communications degree, you have your bachelor's degree, and you decide, I'm going to get my master's degree now. Now, how many options do you have? You're narrowing it down even more. The old saying is, in education, the higher you go, you learn more and more about less and less, until you become so highly focused. Let's say we're talking about medicine. You become so highly focused that one day you're an ophthalmological surgeon. Think about it. Now, you might know a lot about everything else in anatomy, but darling, I'm not going to let you do surgery on my kidneys. You want to do laser surgery on my eyes? You want to fix me up so I don't wear glasses anymore? We'll go with that. But you ain't touching my cardiovascular system. Why? Because you're not the expert in that arena. So the more you learn, the less you learn. You learn more and more about less and less. Same thing in leadership. As your leadership skills develop, you're going to find that your options are diminished because your leadership level goes higher and higher. But as your options diminish, your responsibilities increase. That's why options diminish. It's because responsibilities increase. Your influence with others is either positive or negative. There is no middle ground. When you are around other people, you're going to be positive or negative for that person. Most of the time, the choice is yours. Now, the person that you're trying to influence, they can make a choice too. They can make a choice not to be influenced by you, to turn you off, to push you away, in which case it makes it negative for them. But whether or not you begin the process of influence in a positive or a negative mode is up to you. So that's it. The fifth element here is our influence can grow. We talked about that, growing and learning more and more and more. Okay? And then finally, the last statement here, people of positive influence add value to the lives of others. If you're a negative influence, you're going to take it away. Have you ever seen a child come under negative influence?
Oh, yeah.
What happens to them?
They become depressed and
They become negative.
struggle
Yeah.
with everything.
Have you ever heard someone make the statement, what children see parents do to moderation, they will take to excess? That's generally a true statement. Whatever your children see in you in moderation, they will take to excess. Because they see you do it, it's okay with you to do it. They see you're okay with it, fine. They're going to take it to excess. The same thing is true in leadership. Whatever someone you are influencing sees in you in moderation, they will take to excess. That's why in one generation, the world is worse and gets worse. If you follow one generation of family, that Max Jukes was one of the that I could name. He was a criminal, a thief. His wife was a prostitute, and their life produced hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of offspring in the generations that followed, and almost to a person, they were either criminals or involved in some type of criminal activity, serving time in prison, cost the state a fortune. But then you look at another man, men of God, men like John Wesley, others, they produced out of their family people who excelled in leadership, who excelled in roles of powerful roles of positive influence in government and all kinds of things. I have something at home I'll try to bring for our last session, because that is so powerful when we get hold of that. Now, the 10 ways to increase influence. That's where we want to get into this tonight. And I think now we can move along pretty quickly. We'll be starting here on page 16 in your notes if you'd like to follow along. Number one way of influencing people, number one, is integrity. Integrity with people. Another story my wife has heard often. When India was under British rule, the British realized they had hold of a jewel of prosperity. So many raw materials and products that came out of India could be sold on the world's market, and they were the British were getting them for really a song, and so they were making a lot of money off the nation of India. And so when the idea came along that India wanted to be independent, the British didn't like that. But a man by the name of Mahatma Gandhi kept pushing for independence. He did it in a peaceful way, and finally he was invited to come to England to give a lecture, to speak at a joint session of the British Parliament, House of Lords, House of Commons. When he arrived and walked in that day, most of the people in that room despised him. They hated him. They did not like Mahatma Gandhi. But in about 2.5 hours, which is about how long he spoke, without notes, he just spoke. He had most of the British Parliament eating out of his hand. He had won most of them over in that 2.5 hour session. Wasn't long after that India got its independence. But here's the point. When it was over, the media came to Mr. Gandhi's personal secretary and asked his personal secretary, how can he do this? We've never seen anybody able to walk up to a podium, stand there and speak for 2.5 hours and not have notes. Just speak and pour themselves out and have such impact on a group of people like the Parliament. And Mr. Gandhi's secretary answered, it's simple. What Mr. Gandhi thinks is what Mr. Gandhi says. And what Mr. Gandhi says is what Mr. Gandhi does. And what Mr. Gandhi does is what Mr. Gandhi thinks. What was he describing? He was describing integrity. Integrity. The word integrity comes from the word integer. Do you remember in school what an integer is?
In math?
Yeah. What is the definition of an integer in math? No. Any whole number is an integer. Okay? And there are some numbers that are only divisible by 1 and by themselves. 13 is divisible by 1, it's divisible by 13. 13 into 13 is 1 into 13 is, and we're talking about arriving at integers every time, but there's only one number that is not only divisible by itself, but the answer is itself. And that's 1. 1 times 1 is, 1 divided by 1 is, And you turn it around, 1 times 1 is, and 1 divided by 1 is. The term integrity means wholeness at the level of 1. That is, your whole spirit, soul, and body are 1. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God. That is integrity. When what you think is what you say and what you say is what you do, you are a person of integrity. Now, I didn't say you'd be a nice person. I've known people in my life who what they thought was, I don't like you. And what they said was, I don't like you. And they lived that way. I don't like you. I've known people whose thought was, I want to hurt you. And they'd tell you, I want to hurt you. And what did they do? They'd hurt you. That, whether we like that or not, that is integrity. I would rather meet a person who lives that life of integrity, who means me harm, than to deal with 10,000 people who say they like me, but they're not people of integrity, who pat me on the back and love me up and all that to my face, but behind my back, they'll take that 6-inch shiv and go between the 4th and the 5th ribs. That's not good living. So the first way to influence, the number one way to influence, and we're talking, really, if you'll notice, we're building on the word influencer. We're building an acrostic on the word influencer. And I is integrity, and that's the number one element required if we're going to be leaders in the world today. We need to be people of integrity. And how long have we lived in a country where things have been moving towards political correctness? A long time. A long time. When you're living in an arena where everybody is, quote, politically or ethnically or they're just so correct. They don't want to offend anybody in what they say. You're living in a trap that's getting narrower and narrower and narrower until you have no freedom left at all. None left at all. You get to the point where you can't even say hello to somebody because they might be offended by the H-E-L-L in the word hello. God help us. But I mean, that's the reality of it. But when you live in a world where people will be honest with you, so many people today are offended by honesty. They're offended by integrity. But this is the number one way to influence somebody. People who are offended at everything don't influence me at all. They don't influence me at all. You know, so much of the things that are happening now, safe zones on college campuses. I know it may sound like I'm talking politically, but I'm not. I'm talking about integrity and influence and being in a world that's politically correct. Safe zones on a college campus? Why? Well, the young people need a place where nobody will debate with them, where nobody can upset them. Oh, okay. And how old are these kids? Well, they're 18, 19 years old. Well, let's go back to 1944. 18 and 19-year-olds were carrying an M1 carbine up on the beaches at Normandy. Now, where was their safe place? And if it had not been for those young men in Normandy in 1944, where were these kids today at 19 and 20B? They might be standing around saying, Achtung, but thank God for the guys that were there in 1944. What I'm saying is, if you and I will become people of integrity, absolute integrity. Now, I had a college professor ask me one time, in fact, we were in a sociology class at Winston-Salem State University. He asked the question, he said, is there anybody in this room who always tells the truth? I'm just naive enough to raise my hand. He looked at her, he said, come now, Reverend. He knew I was a minister. All my professors knew I was a minister. Come now, Reverend. You're sitting there telling me that you always tell. He said, there's just no way anybody can be that way. I said, sure there is. You just refuse to lie.
Any of their business.
He said, I'm going to tell them the truth. Hell, high water, the Internal Revenue Service. A lot of people haven't liked that over my life, but I'll tell you what, it's kept my fat out of the fire. Are you familiar with the equation of what you have to do if you tell one lie? How many lies you have to tell to cover it up? 11. Statistically, you tell one lie, you've got to tell 11 lies to cover it up. Well, if you tell 11 lies to cover it up, now how many you got to tell to cover the 11 up? 121. Now multiply that by 11. You tell one lie, by the end of the day, dear God, you're in the, you're out yonder somewhere in the stars. It's amazing, but that people don't understand that. But if you always tell the truth, you're free.
That's right.
You don't ever have to go back and search your notes to find out what you said before. You always tell the truth. Now you may have to go back and look up facts sometime. I don't remember all the dates about the stories that I tell. Some I do, but some I don't. But I may have to go back and refresh my mind on the facts. But the fact that the story is true doesn't change. Truth never changes. Facts do. Fact. It is December the 14th. Now, for the next 4 hours and 2 minutes, that's also true. But in 4 hours and 2 minutes, what's going to happen? It becomes December the 15th. One tick of the clock, December the 15th. Suddenly, the facts change. So if I said, because now is the 14th, and 5 hours from now, somebody says, what's the date? It's the 14th. No, it's not. It's the 15th. Now, you can say, well, that's a really picky example, but that's the way it works. Facts change. And the fact at this moment may not be the fact at the next moment. Am I making sense? Okay? Fact. Sickness and disease. In fact, this is truth. Sickness and disease exist. Okay? Fact. Sickness and disease may get into my body. Truth. Sickness and disease has no place in my body because my body is the temple of the Holy Ghost and I've been redeemed from the curse of the law. So if you ask me what the truth is about my body, what am I going to tell you? The fact or the truth? I'm going to tell you the truth. By the stripes of Jesus, I'm healed. Well, you don't look healed. Well, thank God I'm not moved by what you see. All right? That's where we have to make the decision in our life. Are we going to be people of integrity? If we are people of integrity, we will always deal in the truth. And if the facts bear up under the truth, we'll go with the facts. But if the facts change, the truth never does. It's always the truth. We talk, again, integrity. It's a powerful place to be. The second, let me continue talking about this for just a moment. When we talk about integrity, because it is so powerful, let's see, no, it's the next one. When you have integrity, you build trust with people. Now, that's something I've shared with you before. There are two things I give to no person. I give no one trust. I give no one respect. Both of those elements must be earned. I will model trust to someone who might be working for me. A new person in the church comes in, they've been here for a while, they've built some trust, and now you put them in charge of a ministry that they're leading in a ministry area, and you've got to trust them. Okay? But at that point, we become like President Ronald Reagan said years ago, trust but verify. Trust but verify. That got me into big trouble years ago in ministry, in pastoring. I trusted beyond the level that I chose to verify. And that will rise up and bite you big time. And it hurts. But I learned my lesson, and since that point in time, I will trust people, but I verify. I will trust a person to the level that I can verify what they're doing in the beginning stages. But later, I will trust a person who has proven themselves to me, whether they can verify what they're saying to me or not. I'll trust them because they're there, they're seeing what they're doing, they know what they're doing. I trust her with my life. She's proven herself to me. 46 years, she's never lied to me. Okay. One person said one time, I'm not angry because you lied to me, I'm angry because I can never trust you again. In fact, that was Wolfgang von Goethe who said that. I'm not angry because you lied to me. I'll forgive a lie. But what angers me is the fact I can no longer trust you. And if I'm trusting you and you lied to me and now I can no longer trust you, then there is a gap in my life. There's a vulnerable place there that shouldn't be there. But if I can trust you, then that vulnerability is not there. Wolfgang von Goethe. Wolfgang von Goethe was a German philosopher. Der Macht ist der Recht. Well, might is right. Okay. Anyway, we'll talk about that sometime another time. He was a German philosopher. He had his ideas. Some of his ideas were good. Some of them weren't. But we need trust. Trust is something that has grown. It's developed over time. Integrity grows trust. And then in looking at some information that I have here, when several top-notch business people, big Fortune 500 business leaders, were asked what is the number one characteristics or what are the top characteristics they look for in hires for people for major promotions, 71% of them put integrity as the first element. 71%. That's something that we need to think about. Are we as leaders demonstrating the kind of integrity that brings trust into the scene? Because if we are, we're on our way to success in leadership. Integrity issues that for influencers to keep in mind. And here's some questions for you. Does my organization have good written values? Now that ought to be easy to answer for a church. We have a book of values, I believe. Do we still have a Bible in the church? Okay, that's our book of values, so we should have values, good written values. Secondly, do leaders practice? The leaders in that organization, do they practice and model those values for everybody else? You know, when you're dealing with a congregation, that can be a problem. There are people that will come into churches who have talent. They have taken that talent and developed it until it has become an exceptional ability. And some have even taken that ability and capitalized on it and developed it until it has become a skill. Now, I use those terms this way. Just because you have a talent does not mean that you have a proven ability to use that talent. Okay, I know people who have a great ear for music, but they've never taken the time to sit down and listen, and they don't work with an instrument, they don't apply themselves. So they've got talent, but they're not using it, they're keeping it buried. That's going to cost them. We know the story there. But I know people who have talent, and they have developed that until they have some demonstrable ability with that talent. Allow me to use this example if you're talking about a larger church. There are people sitting in the congregation who can sing, but have never done anything at all with it, and they'll always be in the congregation. Others have developed their ability or that talent of singing and their desire to sing. They've taken it till they have developed a demonstrable ability with it. They'll be in your choir. Okay? There are yet others who have taken that demonstrable ability and worked it and polished it and developed it and refined it until it is at a level I call skill. Now, I define skill as the ability to do whatever it is you do at or near perfection every time you do it. I know people that if they would give themselves to it, Pastor, who could play a bass. I know people who have given themselves to that to some degree, and they can at least do a rhythm. Doom, 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 doom. You know, and then they can do in the right key. They have some ability. But then there are those people like Abraham Laborio, who has taken bass playing to a skill level. Whatever he does, it is at or near perfection every time he does it. You can have skills, and those skills can waste if you don't use them. So that's something that we need to refine. What should we seek to do where skill level is concerned in leadership?
Hone it.
Hone it. Yeah, is that what you said? Hone it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Don't mean to frighten anybody, but I'm a country boy and I carry a knife, okay? And it's sharp. It'll cut you, okay? Why have a knife if it won't cut something? You got him one back there too. The point is, for me, this is not a weapon. It's not something to intimidate somebody or threaten anybody. This is a tool. It's a tool, and if used properly, it serves well. But it's a poor tool if it's not sharp. If it's a knife and it's sharp, then it's a good tool. And I treat it with respect. You know, more people get cut with dull knives than they do with sharp ones because they don't treat them with respect. Here's the point. Watch this. Here's the blade of this knife. This is the backside of the blade. You can probably see it from where you are. It's an eighth of an inch thick. That's a lot of steel in a blade. Eighth of an inch of steel. There's a lot of power there. You could, I could use that almost for a pry in some things, okay? And I can take it and I'm not going to do it, but I can take it and bang it on a table, bang it on the legs of the chair, and it's not going to damage the blade one whit. Are you with me? But what happens if I turn this sharp point around and start tapping it on the steel?
You're going to dull it.
Yeah. Chip it, dull it, mess it up. My point is this. You mentioned the word hone, and I love that word. I tell people to use that word a lot when talking to people. Hone your skills. Hone them. The Bible gives us a word on that. It says, fortify your strong places. Okay? But look at this. The most delicate place on that knife is the most dangerous place on that knife. It's this edge right here. It's the most delicate place on it. I can drop it. I can lay it out, and this one in particular, I can run over that thing with a car. That's a good knife. And it's not going to do anything, but the most delicate place is that sharp edge right there, that if I were to take it and go across my skin, I'm going to be cut very badly, very quickly. In fact, that happened to me in Jamaica in 2014, about 3 days before my birthday. I had a knife just like this one out, using it as a pry tool on an SUV door that was swings like this. Then it swung open like this, and the latch had closed while it was open, and they couldn't get it closed. And I was prying with a knife like this. My finger pushed the lock out of the way, and that knife collapsed on my hand. And it cut me into the bone through that knuckle. It was a sharp knife. I knew it was a sharp knife. I mishandled it. Not deliberately, but I mishandled it. But that most dangerous part of that knife is the most delicate part. And you need to keep this in mind. As you rise in levels of leadership, we talked about this, your opportunities diminish. Your responsibilities increase. So if we took that triangle and pushed it up like this, the further you rise, you get to the point where you're on what we call the cutting edge. Okay? I have a saying, it's on my business cards, it's on things all around. If you're going to stay on the cutting edge, or if you're going to be on the cutting edge, you have to stay sharp. That means for a knife to stay sharp, there's almost a constant working at different times where you put it on a stone or sharpening instrument to hone the edge. But you've got to remember, as a human being, you can stand the honing as long as there's healing. Okay? You can stand the honing as long as there is healing. And I have discovered that there are basically, well, there's four kinds of people that are in your life, and when you look at it from the standpoint of you leading people, there's the VIPs. Those are the people that are very important people. Those are the people who are already leaders, and you're leading them. There's the VTPs, the very teachable people. These are the people that are the next generation of leaders that you are responsible to teach and train. There are the VNPs. That's where most of your congregation is going to be. Very nice people. They don't do you any harm, but they're not going to be a very strong help. Am I making sense? They're good people, but they just don't take the bull by the horn, so to speak. And then in every church and every business, you also have the VDPs, the very difficult people. They scream so loud and so long that they will utilize the time of the pastor and the time of the leadership, taking them away from their role of leadership where they ought to be training and developing, and in so doing, it diminishes the impact and effectiveness of the congregation. That's one of the greatest struggles that pastors, I feel for my brother back there, when you're pastoring a small church, that's one of the greatest struggles that you have, because you're going to find people, there's somebody who always wants to get your attention. They you could say, well, they're very needy people. Actually, they're not very needy people. Well, I better watch it. I'm going to get into some areas here. I have discovered in my life that most people who appear to be needy are basically lazy. Yeah. Did you hear what Jim Brown said today? I loved it. Jim Brown, former football player, the man is 80 years old. And he said, I am not a victim. He said, I'm living in a country where if you will get up and work and hustle, you can make something of yourself. Yeah, an 80-year-old black man, former football player, and was in the movies. He said, I am not a victim. He said, I live in a country where I can vote, where I can get an education, where I can work, where I can get a doctor, where I can get help, where I can get food, where I can wear nice clothes. I'm not a victim. And he said, these dingo, he didn't use that term. He said, people go around doing it all the time. He said, the problem they're not neat, they're lazy. They're lazy. Okay? So if you can find a way to build a fire into that lazy person, you might be able to turn them into a useful person. But
he works with the youth to help them similar in leadership, like you're talking about.
Exactly. They realized if you build leaders, you build forward movement. If you build followers, you build standards. Okay, we'll look at this. In fact, no, it's not there. It's later. We'll come back to it. Okay. There we go. Integrity. An organization needs good written values. They need people that practice and model them. They do, and then you ask the question, do you place the interest of the people above your own? Every leader asks that, do I place the interest of my people above my own? Okay. Here's a point we need to take off of that. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. God did not tell me to love Marcia and Dennis more than myself, but as myself. So if I'm going to love them with the love of God as I ought to, I've got to love myself as much as I love them. And everything I want to give them, I have got to have for myself. Does that make sense? I can't give you what I don't have. If I don't know how to swim, or if I don't know how to swim well, and I see somebody fall into a hole of water that's 25 feet deep, and they can't swim, and I jump in to help them, guess what's going to happen? Both of us are going to drown. Now, I can't swim well, and I jump in to save them. We're going to have 2 drowning victims out there. Now 2 families are hurt. All right? So, if I love, and I'm a leader, okay? So if I love someone as I love myself, the first thing I'm going to do is learn to swim. All right? And I'm going to live an exampled life in front of that other person that you need to learn to swim. I'm going to encourage you into that. I'm going to give you every opportunity that I can as your leader to put you in a place where you can learn to swim. And while I'm getting you into that place to learn to swim, I'm going to learn how to save your life. I'm going to learn to swim better. So that if I'm in a place where I see you in trouble in the water and I've done what I'm supposed to do, if I just think of you as I think of myself, okay, then I'm just going to kind of stand there and say, you know, that was a very foolish thing, Marcia. You really shouldn't have got out there in that 25-foot hole of water. I warned you about that, and I warned you about that. Get your head above water. Listen to me, girl.